Hey. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. We'll get started in just a few minutes. But while we wait, let us know where you're joining us from in the chat. We're so glad to have you. If this is your first time attending a Black Sort Sites and Conversation program, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. In the chat, let us know where you are joining from. We'll start in just a few minutes. Okay, first up, we have Celeste from Philadelphia. Welcome, Celeste. I see we also have Levon as well. Good to see you here. We have Karen from New Jersey, Pauline from New York City. Welcome. We have more friends from New York City, friends from Brooklyn. Friends from DC, welcome as well. We'll get started maybe just about 2 minutes, but keep letting us know in the chat where you're coming from. And let us know if you are familiar with the Dyckman Farmhouse Museum as well. What does the farmhouse mean to you if you've been before? Let us know in the chat as well. I'll get started just Okay, all right, I've got to read these out. Okay, so Catherine has been here a few times. Welcome again, Catherine. Pauline is coming from the Netherlands. Incredible, good to have you. We have people from England. Welcome, Anita. And then Dr. Ware from Raleigh. Good to have you as well. Grove in North Carolina. Great to have you. Quick note. We definitely want to hear from you throughout this program, so you're welcome to add your thoughts into the chat. Later in the program, we'll use a Q&A function, but for right now, make sure that you have selected everyone under chat. So make sure you hit those 3 dots in the chat box and hit everyone. Another minute or so, but again, good to have you, Levon. And we have people joining from Colorado too as well. Good to have you. Welcome, Donna. Welcome from Georgia. Good to have you as well. All right, friends, we will go ahead and get started. Give me 1 second. I will end my screen share.
Thank you, Adriana. All right, everyone, good evening. Welcome. My name is Shane Coleman. I am the STEAM educator at the Lewis Latimer House. I'm joined today by our 2 wonderful panelists, Melissa Kiewiet and Peggy King Jorde. I'm also joined by Adriana Berkins, the education manager of the Lewis Latimer House, who is managing the Zoom logistics. Tonight, we're going to dive into an engaging discussion on the rich history of the Dyckman Farmhouse Museum Alliance. The Dyckman Farmhouse, a Dutch colonial home located in northern Manhattan, neighborhood of Inwood, was home to the Dyckman family, who arrived in the Dutch settlement of New Amsterdam as early as the 1660s from Westphalia. The house and farm are run with the labor from enslaved people, and the museum works tirelessly to tell this history. Over the course of generations, the farmhouse property would change hands, eventually falling into disrepair in the 1900s. In response to the possible danger of losing the farmhouse, two daughters of the last Dyckman child to grow up in the house bought the property in 1915 to ensure its preservation. Tonight's presentation, however, sheds light on a more recent discovery and collaboration between the Dyckman Farmhouse Museum and the Bowery Residents Committee, an organization dedicated to supporting the city's unhoused community. Since 2015, the Dyckman Farmhouse Museum and both the descendant and broader community have worked to raise awareness about the significant and historic Inwood Sacred Site. We will have the opportunity to learn more about the ongoing project to memorialize the burial site, engage with the community, and return the ancestral remains removed from the site in 1903. Our panelists will discuss the importance of this memorialization and how it will serve as a space for repair, remembrance, and connection for the descendants and the broader New York community. Black Historic Sites and Conversations is a series of virtual talks in collaboration with different Black heritage sites and cultural centers in the greater New York City area about the ongoing work of preserving, interpreting, and celebrating Black history and historical figures. This program was funded in part by Humanities New York, with support from the National Endowment for the Humanities. I would like to also start by acknowledging the Lewis Latimer House is located in Flushing, Queens, and is on the land of the Matanacock, or of the Algonquin people, the Aboriginal occupants of northwestern Long Island. Among the first to feel the impact of European settlement and seldom mentioned after the colonial period, the Matanacocks experienced profound changes after the 17th century. To learn more about the Matanacock Nation, we encourage you all to visit their website and Facebook page that we will now share in the chat. If you're not familiar with this story, Lewis Howard Latimer was born on September 4th, 1848, in Chelsea, Massachusetts, to Virginians Rebecca and George Latimer, whose self-emancipation sparked abolitionist movements in Boston. Lewis Latimer served his country, enlisting in the Union Navy at the age of 16 in 1864, during which he taught himself how to draw. Latimer became a chief draftsman, patent expert, and inventor. Working with Hiram Maxim, Alexander Graham Bell, and Thomas Edison, he supervised the installation of lighting systems in New York, Canada, and London, and of the 7 patents he received, his improvements to the incandescent light bulb made lighting more practical and affordable. He was also a creative, a musician, a poet, and an artist. As a Black man living and working during the late 1800s and early 1900s, his story and impact drive the work and mission of the Lewis Latimer House today. Our speakers tonight are Melissa Kiewiet and Peggy King Jorde. Melissa Kiewiet is the executive director of the Dyckman Museum Farmhouse Alliance. Kiewiet began their career with the Dyckman Farmhouse Museum in the March of 2018 as a Development and Community Engagement Fellow and served as the Director of Development and Community Engagement for the Dyckman Farmhouse Museum Alliance from July of 2021 to February of 2023. During this time, they were instrumental in raising funds to conduct historical research and provide crucial programming and services to the Inwood community. They are passionate about museums as drivers for social change and as community anchors. Kiewiet earned their bachelor's degree in history from Maryville College in Maryville, Tennessee. They are a graduate of Cooperstown Graduate Program at the State University of New York College at Oneonta, where they earned their master's degree in museum studies. They have worked in various development departments in the arts and culture sector prior to their current position and serve on the board of the Maryville College Alumni Association and the Mid-Atlantic Association of Museums. They also serve as a steering committee member for the Northern Slavery Collective and maintain a membership with the Cooperstown Graduate Association. Peggy King Jorde is a Harvard Globe Fellow, Consulting Penn Scholar, and principal of King Jorde Culturals. Combining more than 30 years of experience in historic preservation and project planning, development, design, and management for cultural, civic, and heritage projects, King Jorde's multidisciplinary practice collaborates with marginalized communities, civic authorities, design professionals, developers, and creatives on projects for public art, cultural, and sacred sites and events. Ms. King Jorde was a pivotal leading figure in the struggle to protect an African burial ground in Lower Manhattan. Later, New York Mayor David N. Dinkins named her his special advisor on the New York African Burial Ground Project. She subsequently left the mayor's office to serve as the project consultant and director of memorialization, leading the design competition, which realized the African Burial Ground National Monument and Interpretive Center. Peggy is a film producer and participant in the British documentary A Story of Bones. The film had its world premiere at 2022 Tribeca Film Festival in New York. It chronicles the fight to memorialize an African burial ground on the island of St. Helena Helena, a British territory in the South Atlantic. The burial ground for thousands of enslaved Africans is considered a significant trace of the transatlantic slave trade's Middle Passage. She was a keynote speaker for the UN Slavery Remembrance and a recent appointee to the St. Eustatius Cultural Heritage Implementation Committee, consulting on an African burial ground preservation project on the Dutch Caribbean island of St. Eustatius. In addition to consulting on sites in Georgia, New Jersey, and the New York metropolitan area, King Jorde is a project consultant for the memorialization of the Inwood African Burial Ground and Lenape Ceremonial Site in New York City. Peggy is also a 2024 New York State Preservation League Pillar awardee. Tonight we'll hear a presentation by Melissa and Peggy, followed by a conversation and Q&A session. If you have any questions that you would like the panelists to answer, please feel free to share them throughout the Q&A function that will open up after their presentation. We will likely be able to get to about 10 questions depending on the time. Please also feel free to comment, share your thoughts in the chat as the presentation goes. Without further ado, Melissa and Peggy, I pass it to you.
Thank you so much, Shane. I'm going to share my screen really quick. Uh-oh, I'm on the wrong slide. There we go. All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Melissa Kiewiet. As Shane said, I'm the executive director of the Dyckman Farmhouse Museum. I've had the pleasure of working for the museum since 2018 in a number of capacities, and it is now my pleasure to continue the work that my predecessor and mentor, Meredith Horsford, began as director of the museum during her tenure. The Dyckman Farmhouse Museum is the last Dutch colonial farmhouse on the island of Manhattan. It's the second house used by the Dyckman family on the property. The house was built in 1784, so just after the Revolutionary War, and was used by the family until about the 1870s, when they then sold the house and the land. And then, as Shane had mentioned earlier, in 1915, the museum was purchased back by two Dyckman descendants who refurbished and donated the building to the city as a museum in 1916. For the first 100 years, the landmarked site told the story of the Dyckman family and just of rural life in Manhattan. Since 2015, the Dyckman Farmhouse Museum Alliance, the nonprofit tasked with running the museum, has worked to research the history of enslavement on the property and shift its focus to becoming a community-centered museum that tells the story of all people who lived and worked in what is now known as the Inwood neighborhood. As part of that effort, the museum has been working with the community to raise awareness of the enslaved burial site in Inwood. The site was used by the Dyckman, Nagel, and other families to bury the people that they enslaved. The site also served as ceremonial grounds for the Lenape long before those burials took place. And then in 1903, the site was dug up by amateur archaeologists Reginald Pelham Bolton and William Culver. As you might imagine, the 36 disinterred remains were not treated with respect and were either looted or given to, quote, scientists who were studying eugenics. And as the museum entered an era of change in 2015, one that would focus on these marginalized histories of enslaved, freed, and indigenous people, it was important that the history of the burial site be known. So the museum staff worked with PS 98, whose parking lot is right on top of the burial site. And we worked with local artists to acknowledge the site and begin to reckon with this history. And between 2015 and 2020, the museum took part in a press conference about the site alongside local elected officials. And we erected a plaque at PS 98 as a way to memorialize and pay homage to the site. The museum then began extensive research to find out more information about the enslaved and freed people. As part of this research, the museum held community conversations about the site and its history to better understand what our current community might want to know more about and to help guide some of the research. These conversations not only informed the research, but also the site's ongoing programming. The museum began to produce more programs, such as its annual Pinkster celebration, which was initially a Dutch holiday where the Dutch allowed the people that they enslaved to gather and have their own ceremonies, and later became known more as a Black holiday in the U.S. and was not outlawed until 1812. We included direct interaction between artists, community members, and staff about the topic of enslavement at the farmhouse. In 2020, the site directly next to PS 98, which had been an auto body shop, was also placed on top of this important site, was bought by the Bowery Residents Committee, also known as BRC. For more than 50 years, BRC has worked with the city's unhoused population to create and deliver a wide range of treatment and services. The Inwood site was set to become a transitional shelter designed to provide shelter and resources to people as they work toward finding permanent housing. As BRC began to prepare the site, they became aware of its history and stopped work immediately. They then engaged a team of archaeologists to survey the site for any remains or burials still on the site, of which none were found. Upon the completion of the survey, BRC hosted a large gathering of descendant communities and had libation and land acknowledgement ceremonies, a consecration ceremony. And during the survey, BRC also engaged the Dyckman Farmhouse Museum as a community anchor to work with BRC leadership and the consultant hired by BRC, Miss Peggy King Jorde, to begin a period of community engagement surrounding the use of the site. Together, the museum, BRC, and Miss King Jorde located key community representation to create the affinity group for the Inwood Sacred Site, also known as AGES. And then AGES members included members of the neighborhood's community board and community leaders, member of descendant communities, and representation for the Lenape. Along with this group, a series of virtual conversations were held, and the virtual aspects of these conversations was necessary because the pandemic was in full swing at this time. But it also allowed far more people to be involved than in previous conversations held by the museum alone. From these conversations, the AGES group was tasked with compiling feedback and making recommendations for the use of the site, and their 8-page report detailed how the community felt the space could be best utilized to memorialize and honor its history, serve the current community, and have permanence for communities of the future. From this report, BRC and the Dyckman Farmhouse Museum Alliance began with the guidance of Miss King Jorde to work through and plan for part of the site to serve as a shelter, while another part would be set aside for a memorial. Many decisions still had to be made. Who would run the sacred site? What would it look like? How do we deliver on all the recommendations the community has so generously given us? BRC and the Dyckman Farmhouse Museum have held bi-weekly meetings for the past 2 years as they work together to answer these questions. Thanks to the leadership and research from Ms. King Jorde, several remains have been located at the American Museum of Natural History. And Ms. King Jorde began the process of engaging the staff there that are dedicated to repatriation. And after many meetings and discussions about the site and the intentions of BRC and Dyckman Farmhouse Museum, the Natural History Museum has agreed to repatriate the remains to be reinterred on the site once the design and build out are complete. The group of architects that were hired for their expertise in designing such sites are currently they just put the finishing touches on their work, and we're going to show you that. Miss King Jorde will show you that tonight. And together, BRC and Dyckman Farmhouse will work together to serve displaced people throughout space and time. And so with that, I am going to hand it off to Peggy to talk to you and show you the design, which is very exciting. You're muted, Peggy.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Peggy King Jorde, and I've worked very closely with the design team, collaborating with them because I spend most of my time working on African burial ground sites globally, and talking to communities about how it is that they define memorialization. And each community is very different, and each site is very different. So I'll walk you quickly through the proposed design, the Inwood Sacred Center Memorial. Oops. So this is a site plan where it actually exists in New York, Upper Manhattan. The Inwood African Burial Ground was unearthed adjacent to the Lenape shell middens from an earlier time. So middens are a collection of refuse from past human settlements. They often contain shells, tools, and other artifacts from daily life. But we also considered when we worked together or collaborated on the design, we considered that the immediate adjacency of the burial site to the existing Lenape shell middens may have served as a ritualistic and spiritual opportunity for Africans to observe a traditional practice tied to burying their loved ones. As in the Congo region, lining the grave with shells is believed to ensure a spirit's safe journey. So this is the site as it existed prior to demolishing an auto parts repair space. Right now, the shelter is under construction and nearly done. So there are a number of things that we consider when you start to approach design. I'll share what the inspiration of the design was for. Inspiration for the memorial design, it's rooted in intercultural traditions, meaning the Lenape as well as African. And so we tried to bring those things together. So one of the first items was that we were drawing inspiration from the praise house tradition of the American South, which served as a sacred space for community gatherings, ceremony, and forms of resistance. The Inwood Sacred Center is intended to be a sanctuary where stories and history, once silenced, can find resonance. So because we are including repatriation, we looked at burial mounds as a shared cultural tradition. The actual site in Inwood, the burials were, I guess, in or around a mound. And then there are traditions in the Native American community as well as in the African burial ground, the national monument. We do have where the over 400 remains were returned to the site, burial mounds there. And in fact, one of the architects was Elizabeth Kennedy, was the landscape architect for the National Memorial. The sassafras is steeped in Indigenous and African American culture. For the Lenape, the three-lobed leaf is a potent symbol of healing. For African Americans, we're reminded of culinary traditions such as the use of sassafras as a thickening agent in gumbo, and it reminds us of the intersection of West African cultures, Native American, and many others, particularly because of the slave trade. And considering the cosmogram, we considered the similarities of the Congolese cosmogram and the Native American medicine wheel, both sacred signs tied to healing, spiritual direction, connection, and the connection to ancestors. The cosmogram pictured to the right is actually at the Schomburg Center in one of the main halls. We also have a cosmogram that is installed at 290 Broadway at the National Monument African Burial Ground, and so considered similarly an abstraction of the cosmogram for this design. So the other thing considered is we considered the importance of community, of course, community engagement. What kind of engagement? Inviting visitors to reflect upon the legacies of enslavement and pay respects to those individuals laid to rest at the site because they were unceremoniously removed from the site and now being brought back to rest, while at the same time honoring the Lenape people who were dispossessed by colonial expansion. So now we'll just take a walk in front of and into the center. This is the proposed facade. There is a window to the far right, which looks into the exterior garden. You see now the sassafras leaves and abstracted that are being used on the facade. And the front entrance, this is another view of that along the front. What's also proposed, even though in the other pictures we didn't include the trees because you wouldn't be able to see the facade, but here what is proposed is that we will have trees with tree wells so that there's an opportunity for the community to participate in plantings, maybe that honor the history of the site. Also, we're proposing bronze medallions in the sidewalk as a way of marking the district or the area. These bronze medallions are very large, and they actually are in the African Burial Ground Historic District. The one on top recounts certain histories around the Native American presence in New York, and then the lower one addresses the African Burial Ground, the history of African presence. So here's the plan. Visitors, I can try and walk you through. Visitors are invited to descend a gently sloping ramp into the gathering space reminiscent of the Praise House. The pathway is symbolic, a passage through time and memory from the physical world to the spiritual world. The poignant words, "I am here, I am home," are embedded in the wall at the end of the ramp and repeated in Indigenous, African, and other languages. The message is a powerful reminder of the 7 individuals returning to their spiritual and literal origins at the site. The Sacred Center room, a communal area, is at the heart of the interior memorial. The room's flooring contains an embedded abstraction of the Congolese cosmogram and Indigenous medicine wheel. And the exterior garden features a circular burial mound designed for reflection and remembrance in full view of the interior space. The discreet but deliberate feature of the opening of the earth across the top of the burial mound speaks to the narrative of untold stories and histories, urging visitors to consider the complexities of past injustices on an ongoing reconciliation. So I'll walk you through the interior. So this is a view of the interior. You can see the cosmogram on the floor. On the back walls, those are apses that are reminiscent of reliquaries, because there were a number of remains that were removed from the original site. We have no idea where they are. So we only have 7 returning, but those honor the countless others that may have been at the site. This is another view so that you see the front door and you come down the ramp, and you can see the center of the room and the view of the burial mound. This is looking back up the ramp. And what is also proposed is that the seating is made out of sassafras wood. At the end of the ramp, I mentioned "I am here," "I am home" in various languages embedded in the wall. This is out in the garden, the burial mound, an area to sit and reflect. And if you look at the far wall to the upper left, there is a window from this sidewalk. So the garden can be viewed from the sidewalk. And this is the final view, again, just reminding you of the facade. And so the memorial as a whole is meant to engage with its story, a narrative woven with threads of resilience, remembrance, and respect, urging us to honor the past while shaping a future grounded in collective memory and justice. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. Two incredible presentations that I think really collaborate on the incredible and what sounds like very involved work that both of you have been doing. We're going to move into a audience Q&A. This will last until about 5 minutes before the program ends, and we would like to invite our participants to use the Q&A function to ask our guests questions about their presentation, about their work, about the sites that they represent, and the things that they do. As the questions start to come in, we can always kind of open up the conversation with a little bit of an icebreaker. What are some kind of lesser known aspects of the sites that you work at? Something that the general public wouldn't be privy to?
That's a great question. I think, well, the general public doesn't realize how hard it is to keep a historic house site going. I think that's something you all know a little something about. But also, it really amazes me how many people that we get that actually don't realize that enslavement happened in the North. And so it's always kind of shocking to me, but at the same time, I realize that everybody comes from a different perspective and background, and so it's actually really interesting to figure out different ways and different entry points depending on where a person is and their knowledge to start to interact with them about that history, and particularly when we do it through art. I find that to be a really engaging, everybody's kind of coming to this art piece on equal footing, and it allows them to open their mind to learning about the history without maybe feeling defensive or railing against it, like this didn't really happen here or something like that. So art has been a really big piece of that, and finding, Inwood is a lot of people don't know this, but Inwood is a neighborhood. It's called like the last affordable neighborhood in Manhattan. I don't know how true that is because it's pretty expensive still. But we're so lucky to have so many incredible artists. And so we've been able to work with a lot of local artists to kind of tell this story.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to piggyback on that, the fact that so few people knew, I mean, and to think how huge and how global the institution of the transatlantic slave trade is, that you wouldn't know in New York that Wall Street was dealing in human bodies and all kinds of other things tied to that practice and not know it. And I will say my personal story is that the way that I got involved more than 30 years ago with the African Burial Ground, I was working in the mayor's office at the time, was that a coworker of mine who was like 27 years older than me worked for the Parks Department, and he got a hold of an environmental impact statement and shared it with me. And he was like, he's a German American. He went to public school in New York. And he came to me and he said, Peggy, can we have lunch? I have something to show you. And he shared this document that the federal government paid to have them, people, professionals, tell them how the site had been used. So they knew all along. And but he saw this map of the Negroes Burying Ground, and he was saying, "There's this history in there, and I had no idea." And he considered himself a history buff. But how is it that you keep that big a secret that your nation does not even know that, right? And that New York was I think they were the largest, second to Charleston. So it's amazing. And then we think about where we are today, right? With history and all of that. So I would say cultural institutions like the Dyckman Farmhouse, like Van Cortlandt, like all of the museums and cultural institutions out there who are trying to help tell this story, the more the community comes out, the better the story. It helps those institutions hone those stories.
That's really incredible. I think it's also spurred some folks in the audience to inquire further. We have a question from Anthony. What are some of the skill sets employed to develop such a site? For example, landscaping, construction, artistry. Who leads the design project? How does it work?
Well, usually in this instance, things can be different. In this instance, you have a developer, which is BRC, but they pull together a design team, and someone takes the lead on that design team to lead the design. But everybody comes to the table with their different expertise. In this instance, we had, Native American artists, architects, African American architects, and while my background is also architecture, I'm coming through with dealing with just the whole history and how do you translate memorialization and what communities want. A lot of it has to do with emotion. And how do you tell this story? And each story is different. So I sit with designers to have that conversation but then I can take a look at physical spaces and think about how do we use architecture or design, the language, as a way of telling or supporting that story. And so in the case of this project, it was important to take those two communities who have experienced and endured and overcome the atrocities that were impacted upon two different communities. And that was the challenge.
Thank you so much for sharing. We have a couple more questions coming in. Catherine asks, can you please speak more about the biweekly meetings between the Bowery Residents Committee and the Dyckman Farmhouse? How did the meetings seek to respect and give voice to all the stakeholders that were in the project?
Well, I would say that one of the biggest things you can always do when you talk about really respecting stakeholders, it's listening. It's not talking at, it's not using your degrees to tell everybody this is what I've done, or I'm this, that, and the other. You come to the table, all of that stuff is taken off. Everybody is a stakeholder, and it's about, everyone being able to come to the table and share their ideas and share their feelings about, a site like this. Navigating emotional sites is a practice in listening and trying to understand, how best this will be expressed for people.
And to piggyback off that, I think that, Dyckman Farmhouse comes to the table with a background of already doing that skill set of listening. We have been since 2015 holding community conversations. Those are so important for us as a museum because we can come up with ideas all day long, But if it isn't meaningful and impactful to the community, why are we even bothering? So we need to go and listen to the voices of the people who are in that community and see what their needs and wants are, and then we can build from there.
Right. We also did on this project, developed a visioning portal for the community members who formed an advisory committee. And with that visioning portal, we posed all kinds of questions, trying to get people to really, come from different directions about how it was that they felt about the site, what would they like to experience at the site, all of that.
Sometimes
And
I get caught up. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just going to also add the site, someone was saying, the site is a very intimate and small site. We're not talking about a massive space. And I once got a question about, how is it to design for such a small space? And I said that one of the most powerful spaces that I'd ever been in was the Anne Frank house, in Amsterdam. And that's a small space. And to tell that story at that scale, size does not matter. It's really about the story.
Thank you so much for that. I was going to say, I think I get really swept up sometimes. I forget that I'm part of the facilitation, so I have to jump back into my role. We have more questions coming in. This next question comes from Levon. What, if any, role can anthropologists play in the design process and the storytelling and the community outreach? There's a PS attached to this question that Levon is a trained anthropologist, and this would have been an impactful experience when they were in grad school as a PhD student.
I think that, again, it's anthropologists and archaeologists. And I will say, I have to admit, I started learning a lot more about the field when I was working on the African burial ground. But one of the things that I became sensitive to, and it was new for me, and it's still a challenge for a lot of projects like this, and that is anthropology and archaeology. It has this colonial past, right? So you kind of got that baggage to kind of overcome, depending upon who's on the other end. And one of the challenges with the African burial ground was that you had people who did not look like me who were excavating in the ground. So if you are the one who's interpreting the resource, you are telling the story. If you aren't communicating with the community, if you don't have people who look like me who can bring to the table knowledge about, that world and include, perspectives or a lens to the story, then you're only interpreting the story the way it's always been interpreted, which has not been supportive of Black lives, Black and brown people. So, when you talk about, resources, the theft of resources, things like that, and how things are acquired and the stories that are told. So as an anthropologist, I say encourage others to explore that field, but also come to it with the idea that you have a community who's been exploited for generations. And so being sensitive to that and thinking about how do you best communicate to the community, how anthropology, how you can serve the project or design or making people to understand or interpretation for that matter.
Amazing. Our next question, I want to make sure I'm naming it correctly. I think it's about the Pinkster Festival. So the next question comes from Anita. Could you tell us more about the Pinkster Festival being outlawed?
Yes, absolutely. So I'll give a little bit of background because I just glossed over that so quickly in my talk. I really wanted to give Peggy as much time to show that design as possible. So Pinkster started, it was a Dutch holiday. It's 7 weeks after Easter. It is to celebrate the Pentecost. It was like a week-long celebration. They often gave their enslaved people that time off as well, and then they would travel to neighboring farms to gather and have their own cultural celebrations. And it became, a thing that so much so that even after the Dutch, gave up New Amsterdam and it became New York, right, under British control, it was a thing that continued in Dutch households. So it was very regional. It was like New York City, parts of New Jersey, I think, and like up in Albany. These traditions continued, and but then in the early 1800s, you get more and more restrictive laws, right? There's more fear of uprising and that sort of thing. So it ended up being outlawed, these gatherings, and I think it's 1812 or 1811. I know it was right around the time of the War of 1812. And so now it's something that we do every year at the museum. We have like a Pinkster festival that is used to tell the story of what Pinkster is, but also to just celebrate the Black experience, and have all kinds of different cultural programming at that time at the museum, and just kind of raise awareness that this was a holiday and a joyous event. And yeah, I hope that answers the question fully.
It's an incredible history. I just looking it up, say that there's one in Tarrytown, in Sleepy Hollow in New York, for those
Mhm.
who are local to New York out there. We have a follow-up question. So the earlier question that was asked about what kind of skill sets employed develop such a site, the follow-up asks, to add to my question, are there organizations or judges organizations that judge those sites or judge them for awards?
There could be, but I don't know. Yeah, there could be, but nothing specific to, I don't know if the question is really specific to memorials and, whether there's a group. It'd be great if there was, because I think that's a whole other um field of just design, and that remembering that memorialization isn't really just about a statue. I mean, it is defined by how people actually use the site, and engage the site in some ways. And so I do a lot of talking to communities about that. A couple wants to donate land to the local Black community, and the community was reluctant to take it because they thought we have to fundraise and build a monument. And I sat with them to say, no, you can just simply occupy the land, and that is remembrance, because this was land that your ancestors worked. You can be at rest, and that is memorialization without building anything. So
That's really interesting. I'm so sorry. I do know that there are architectural awards for museums specifically. But I don't know of any for memorials, but it's a very interesting thought.
Yeah, if it's something that doesn't exist, I'm sure that in the future it should.
Yeah.
Um, This next question has a little bit of a background to it. Andrew states, I'm a part of a group working to preserve and honor an African American cemetery in Maryland. As we focus on creating an accessible space and thoughtful architecture around the site, how can we start identifying architectural elements that are both respectful and reflective of the site's cultural and historical significance?
Um, it, I would say think in terms of multiple resources. Talk to people, go to communities where, you might walk into a community and somebody's got a bottle tree and there are shells that are whatever, you may have tabby walls. I mean, all kinds of things. And understanding it really is to the person who was saying that they were an anthropologist, having a knowledge about how people live, what they do, how they surround themselves, what things have meaning to them. And I really think that the language around African burial grounds and this history that's been obscured, it's still a language that's in development when you talk about memorializing, because we're still trying to get to these places. And many of the sites that have African burial grounds don't belong to the community. They're privately owned. So there's that struggle, all of that. So it's, for me, I think design wise, it's an exciting time because there's so much to draw from the South to other areas, in New Jersey. So I think when you talk about where to draw it from, it's really start with the communities, and then just doing your research, a lot of reading, burial traditions or whatever traditions there are, understanding those traditions, and getting out into the communities to create a lexicon of design approaches.
Incredible. Melissa, did you want to add anything?
If you don't know, find someone who does, like Peggy.
I'm here.
You know what?
All day long.
honestly, it was not something that was part of my knowledge. A lot, plenty of this stuff. So finding the people who have that expertise, and that is really key.
Can I add something as well? And I always like to share this with people, particularly as relates to African burial grounds. People have asked me, in New York or in other urban settings, they'll say, oh, we'll never build anything if we try and preserve all the burial grounds. There are lots of burial grounds. And what I tell them is that after so many years of working on this, I get them to imagine a society in the world that says, that a certain group of people have no rights, that a white man need respect, that they are not human, or anything like that. But then you have archaeologists who say that part of defining us being human is how we bury our dead, and that we bury our dead, right? We engage in ceremony, we pour libations, we say important words, we sing, all of that. So imagine the same community of people upon the death of a loved one, and only by permission of their oppressor that they're permitted to bury somebody. That moment, whatever that little ceremony is that they're engaging in, they would actually be reclaiming the humanity that the society said they aren't human. And it would actually be, in my view, a revolutionary act. If you live in a world that says you have no rights and you're not human, and if it's a revolutionary act, I think of those sites as places not just where artifacts or remains are, but in fact where powerful revolutionary acts of remembrance took place. They are, hallowed ground because of that. And in this country, we preserve battlegrounds. And for me, African burial grounds are in fact that. It's where people reclaim their humanity. And that's why, for me, they are really significant and important to preserve as a place of memory, particularly.
Absolutely. Looking at the time, it's coming close to the end of the program. I want to open up an opportunity for each of you to let folks in the chat know, folks in the audience know how they can support you, what what's going on, what's coming up next for the Dyckman Farmhouse Museum Alliance.
Yeah, well, actually, next week on Wednesday, February 26th at noon, we're having the third installment of our Talking About Race Matters lecture series. And it's going to be about envisioning Seneca Village. I believe they're doing a interactive 3D model of what the village may have looked like. So don't miss out on that presentation, and you can register on our website, which is dyckmanfarmhouse.org. And just follow us on your favorite social media platform, and we'll share all of the cool and interesting programs that are coming up.
And for me, I'm a consultant, so I'm working all around. In fact, I'm dashing because I'm going to be speaking at the London Museum Docklands on Saturday, so I'm catching my flight tonight. But if anyone is interested, my website I think is going to be available on the website here, or just if you're interested in talking about a project, or of a project, and don't be afraid to pick my brain.
And we are in the chat currently, sharing all types of information. Again, contact with our facilitators. We're going to begin to close, but please do remember that in the chat, you're going to find a feedback form, as well as we are going to record this and post it on YouTube. So you'll be able to kind of go through all the information that's been shared and all the rich and lovely conversation that we had. This was our last Black Historical Sites in Conversation for this season, and we thoroughly enjoyed hosting these webinars and are very thankful for all of your participation. Let us know if there are any other Black Historical Sites in New York City that you would like us to include in the future. If you enjoyed tonight's program, you can sign up for our email newsletter to learn more about future events, and of course, support the events of our two wonderful facilitators. I wish everyone a great night, Peggy a safe flight, and thank you all for joining.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.